Good evening, YouTube. This is Rob Pollard. This is a video to show off new functionality that's been added to Ancient Armies. In this case, the ability for units to change formation. So let's show that now. Let's run up the game. I've created one scenario for this, and it has two sets of units. It has blue Macedonian units, which are set up to replicate the real units, and I'll show you some of the insights the system's provided for me with regard to that. I've also set up some red units, which are hypothetical units, so I can demonstrate some of the bits and bobs surrounding formation changes. So let's OK that. I'm going to turn off line of sight because we actually want to see everything. OK. Cool. Right, let's have a look at the hypothetical units first, the red ones. Now here I got four seemingly similar cavalry units, but they all have different formation types allocated to them. Adding formations to Ancient Armies was quite difficult for a number of reasons. One is the order symbology. In the old days, you could just issue orders like this, and maybe get it to wheel, and maybe charge. And the symbology only ever had to take into account that the unit would be one shape. That's no longer the case. Which means that I had to update the system to take different shapes into account and to calculate all these angles and things properly. So, for example, if I order this unit to change to a wedge, for instance, and then I get him to wheel. And note that from here on in, the system knows that I'm a wedge and not a square, and you can change formations numerous times. It works really well, and that was pretty difficult to get into the system to get it right. The other thing I wanted to do is ensure that when a formation was changed, the new formation didn't exceed the leading edge of the formation's current placement, because that's important. In most games, your units are going to be aligned on geographical boundaries, or they might be behind other units, and you don't want the new formation to impinge forward in that way. So Ancient Armies actually moves the unit backwards or forwards to ensure that its new formation, its leading edge, is where the old formation's leading edge was. So if you look at this wedge, the leading edge is right on the tip of there, and if I changed it to back to a standard hip arc, you'll see the new hip arc's leading edge is also there as well, even though the centre of the unit's actually been moved up. So it's a lot of little advanced features in there which you probably necessarily wouldn't notice as a games player. Let's get rid of all those orders. Now, Ancient Armies, as I say, you can assign numerous types of formations to a unit, and the formation modelling in Ancient Armies is it's pretty advanced. It takes into account formation shapes. It takes into account frontages. And by frontages I mean how many men form a unit in terms of rows and columns. But it also simulates densities, and that, i.e., how close or how far apart those men are. Now, where a unit doesn't have, only has one formation, its default formation, there's no change formation in the menu. That's automatically filtered out. But the menu system also does other advanced filtering in that, for instance, if I right click on Cavalry 2, you can see it has two formation changes of open and standard. Now, these are actually density changes, even though they appear directly off change formation. Whereas if we look at Cavalry 3, it has double width and standard. Now they're actually frontage changes, but again they appear directly under formation. Now, when I designed the menu system, I wanted to basically provide the players with as few navigation moves as possible. I mean, if I was to do like the densities over here properly, you'd actually have change formation, then you'd have the formation name, then you'd have the frontage name, and then you'd have these two densities right at the end, which makes for a rather large menu, but the system's pretty intelligent. If I take it to the army editor, I'm going to show you, I guess, more easily what I mean by this. Let's minimize that. Let's run up the army editor. We'll open up the Red Army. I haven't really shown the army editor on video before. Maybe one day I should cover it, 'cause there's a lot of stuff in this. So this is our Red Army, and let's show you what I mean. So here's Cavalry Unit 2. It's got one formation, a hip arc. But if I go and edit that formation, you can see this formation has one frontage, and that frontage is 50 troops by 10 troops. And inside that frontage, it supports two densities, standard and open, with standard being 1.2 by 3 meters and open being a little bit wider. Ancient Armies allows you to add as many of both as you want. You can make some really complex formations. Though you can compare and contrast that with Cavalry Unit 3, which, whilst it looks the same from the top, it has a hip arc formation. If we edit its hip arc formation, you can see that it actually has two frontages, a standard one, which is 50 by 10 troops, and a double width one, which is 100 troops by 5. Both of these only have one density each, although you could add many densities for each. So let's go over it. Again, the unit's formation consists of the overall formation, which kind of defines the shape of the formation. One or more frontages, which defines how many troops, form widths and depths. And finally, each frontage can have one or more density settings, which tell you how far apart the troops are. So very, very flexible system. With this, you should be able to model any ancient battle formation. And let's get back to the game. Now, back into the game. What I'll do now, I'll show off the various formation changes. What I'm going to do, I'll show off a density change first, then a frontage change, and then a full-on formation change. And you'll find density changes happen relatively quickly, frontage changes take a little bit longer, and formation changes a lot longer. And you'll be able to see that now. So let's start off with the density change. So mission order. So we're going to move them from standard density to open density, so the men actually going to move a little bit wider apart. I see the new graphic shows the width it's going to take up. Now, before we kick off, I want to explain the graphical representation of formation changes. Basically, they're functional as opposed to showing precise individual people positions. And the reason why is different countries will have different drills for changing formation, and even within a country different units have different drills, and to model each and every one of them would be almost impossible to do. So I've gone for a functional graphical approach, and by functional I mean I wanted the graphics to be able to firstly show the player that yes, that particular unit is in the middle of changing formation, but also to provide information to the player with regard to how far into the formation change the unit is. And you'll be able to see that when this formation changes. The other thing I've done is when it changes to new formation, it tends to build the new formation from I guess the front to rear, but you'll see that now anyway. So let's kick this off and see how he does with his density change. Here we go. So there you go. Very quick for a density change. That took what, about 5 seconds? Not long at all. Now the timings that they do vary a little bit anyway, but also units can cock up the formation change depending on their training and discipline and make it take even longer again. And during a formation change, units cohesion is impacted quite a lot. So you want to make sure that when you're changing formation, you leave enough time so that your unit isn't impacted by enemy units during a formation change, because that would be really bad. So as you see, this unit here, he changed formation really, really quickly. Of course, we can change formation back, and that shouldn't take very long at all. So back to standard. Let's hit play. There you go. Back standard, very, very quick. And the reason why it's quick is, in real life, all the men are doing in this particular case is they're kind of bunching up or moving further apart. It's a very simple maneuver for everyone to carry out, and it doesn't really take very long. Now, of course, this is still a game in development and things might get tweaked, but these are based on the timings that I've kind of researched. I'm sure I could add more modelling to it. So that's that unit there. Another thing I like to discuss is this is fully integrated with Kronos, the replay system, so you can, if you wish, call it up and actually watch things sort of go. So it's pretty good in that respect. Watch it as many times as you want. So it's fully compatible with the replay system. Right, on to the next unit. Cavalry 3, we're going to get him to actually change his frontage. Now that takes a little bit more work because you actually got people from the rear ranks filling into the forward ranks, and in this case it's going to result in a little bit denser formation. So let's see how long that takes. Hit play. So you see, it's a lot slower formation change than the density change. It's taking a lot longer for the rows to move. Now, as discussed earlier, these dots and things don't actually show where the men actually are. It's just a functional representation so that you can see what's happening and you can see how far this unit is into its formation change. So there you go. It completed that in around 30 seconds, so not too bad. And again, the units trading and discipline have quite a large effect on the timings. What about the biggest change of all? What about an entire formation change? Now, this isn't just changing rows, and isn't just changing densities, but actually changing the actual shape. So let's get this cavalry unit to adopt the rhomboid formation as used by the Thessalian cavalry. Let's see how long that takes. So as you see, this looks like it's going to take a lot longer. Now, Ancient Armies turns are currently only 30 seconds apiece, so this certainly won't be completed in a turn, or at least I'd be very surprised if it was. The other thing Ancient Armies does, which I haven't really shown, is the text. It starts off on the original formation, and then as the densities switch over, that text then transfers to the new formation. And the only reason why you see text there now is because we're back in order planning, and what you'll see is the overlay, but once we hit play that will disappear. Now this is going to take a bit of time, so let's up the time compression to times 10 just to make things a bit faster, and let's go for the next turn. You can see a lot faster at times 10 compression. But even so, at another 30 seconds it's still trying to sort out its formation. So see, this is taking a long time even with times 10 time compression. I see the text has already transferred across because of the change. Frontal formation is fairly solid and it's starting to build back towards the rear. And there you go. It finally did it. It's finally into its rhomboid formation. So there you go. A whole bunch of different types of formation changes demonstrated. Now, these are hypothetical units. I've kind of made them up. However, I do have some units that I put together based on historical research. In this case, the Macedonian Phalanx. And one of the great things that the simulation Ancient Armies is so good that it drives the players to use the formations the way they really were. So the thing I need to be clear about, in most war games, it differentiates between units by actually classifying them, so you'll get things like light infantry, medium infantry, heavy infantry and so forth. There's no such thing in Ancient Armies. In Ancient Armies, every unit is just a unit. And what differentiates those units is equipment, trading, and also the formation. And in Ancient Armies, the formation forms a pivotal part of the simulation. It has an impact on so many different things, and that's why in Ancient Armies a Roman Cohort or Maniple will behave quite differently from Macedonian Phalanx, which in turn will behave quite differently from a Greek Phalanx. And because of the modelling involved, which you saw in the army editor, even different phalanxes of the same type might operate slightly differently dependent on how you set them up. Anyway, let's go on to the Macedonians now. The Macedonian Phalanx had three primary formations that used. I had this formation, which they didn't have a name for because it was the standard formation, and it was used primarily when the enemy were relatively nearby but not in any imminent danger, and it was basically 16 deep. But the Macedonian Phalanx also supported two other formation shapes. I'm sorry about my pronunciations here, I probably got this completely wrong, but the next one was Pycnosis. Now, Pycnosis is a frontage. Well, the frontage is the same. This is the great thing about the Macedonian formation. They changed their depth and their density whilst retaining exactly the same frontage. And this is something I noticed some historians get wrong. There's one historian who was commenting on another historian. This is an ancient historian, and he was saying that the first historian, the guy that actually witnessed Alexander's Macedonian formations changing, he said it couldn't happen because in his mind he thought if a Macedonian formation was changing from 16 deep to 8 deep, its width must double, and that would be impossible on the battlefield. And he's right, that would be impossible. What he didn't take into account is that when a Macedonian formation does this, it's actually getting more denser, and it does that in such a way that the frontage remains the same, even though it's gone from open, which is 16 deep, to Pycnosis, which is 8 deep. Because the density changes between the two are set in such a way that when the formation has changed, the actual frontage remains the same. A very clever manoeuvre on the Macedonian part. And also have a final one. This can be hard to pronounce. Synaspismos, and that's effectively Interlocked Shields, and that's purely a defensive formation. I'll show you that as well. But again, in that one's case, you're down to a depth of only 4 rows, but the density is literally shoulder on shoulder interlocked shields, and as Ancient Armies has shown me, you're not actually going to go anywhere when you're interlocked that much. So this is one of the great things of simulation. It shows all these insights. I'm quite pleased with that respect. So what we'll do, we'll leave Phalangite 1 in its open formation. We'll move Phalangite 2 into Pycnosis. Now Pycnosis is the standard before contact formation. It's 8 deep. In battle, Macedonians, from what I've read, will typically get into Pycnosis sort of just prior to contact, and we'll put the final Phalangite into Synaspismos, which is the most shallow formation of all. So let's hit play and watch these formations change. Now remember, the Macedonians are quite highly trained, are set out that way in this, so you should see both of these formations actually change relatively quickly. I'm guessing within the 30-second period. We'll see. They might cock up, and that can make things take a little bit longer. So how are they doing? Here we go. Now it surprised me because this unit here is the Macedonian Phalanx in its Pycnosis formation. I was surprised at how the depth of it compares with the open formation. I originally thought it would be half, but it's not, and the reason why is because not only are we going from 16 to 8 deep, which is half, but it's also pretty much having the density spacing between the men, which is why it's a lot thinner. And again, without a simulation like this, you'd never know. In your mind's eye, you'd always think it'd be half depth, and that's why I was quite surprised that the Macedonian Phalangite formation is actually so long and thin prior to contact, but that's exactly how it was. And you're probably thinking, why did the Macedonians switch to this formation prior to contact? The reason is the density of that formation is such that you have lots of pikes protruding out the front of the formation, producing a wall of sharp points, and that keeps the enemy away. And from what I've read, not many enemy formations get anywhere near the actual men themselves because the pikes are keeping them back. However, the downside is that with that, the men are so tightly packed that when they move, they start to lose formation cohesion over any kind of ground, really. And if you were to get them to march, say, 500 meters to a kilometer or more, by the time this formation gets to the other end, it's going to be severely disrupted because the terrain will take its toll. Now, I'm sure on a parade ground this wouldn't happen, but most battles don't happen on a parade ground, and standard terrain, even flat terrain, is actually undulating. So Alexander the Great and Philip designs the Macedonian Phalanx so that for most movements in a hostile area, it's actually 16 deep, but the spacing between the men there is quite wide. I think it's about 1.4 meters between the men, which means that the formation can quite easily traverse over ground without taking any kind of cohesion damage. And that's why when you read accounts of Alexander's formations running into battle, you nearly always hear of them starting off 16 deep, and as they approach the enemy, moving to 8 deep, which is I guess the best mix of manoeuvrability and having enough pikes up front. However, the Macedonians did have a third formation, Synapos, can't even pronounce it, the smaller one, and basically this formation, how is it pronounced? Synaspismos. This formation was only used purely defensively, so if they're about to receive a cavalry charge, or in the case of Gaugamela, they actually adopted this formation when the Scythe chariots headed their way. And it's such a tight formation, the men are literally right on top of each other, shields interlocked, and the density of the pikes out the front is double that again, so a huge amount of pikes out front. So the advantage of this formation, very good defensively in that you've got such a high density of people and the shield coverage is quite high, but the downside, as I discovered Ancient Armies, is you can't really move. And we'll see, we'll show that now. So what I'll do, I'll get these 3 Macedonian formations to march around, I don't know, a kilometre. We won't probably get them to go the whole way, but let's compare and contrast how each of them does. And these aren't charges, these are just standard marching moves. So let's go with that. Let's see how they do. So that's about the kilometre mark. And finally the defensive formation. Like I say, I was really surprised to see how thin these formations are, but Ancient Armies, everything's is calculated very accurately, so it does provide a lot of insight into these things. Right, so they're all set up to march. Let's get them going and see what happens. So here we go. I might up time compression on next move. Now, as you see, there's differences in speed. The defensive formation hasn't moved at all, whereas the fully open formation is actually moving a little bit faster than the battle formation, the 8 steep. So one advantage for the Macedonians to assume this wider formation is that because the men have a lot more space, they can move a little bit faster. But also, as we're going to see further on, we'll start to see the effects of cohesion on this. Now notice that this formation here, which I'm going to have to zoom in on and look at the formation name because I can never pronounce it, the Synaspismos formation, note it doesn't have a movement arrow anymore, and that's because the commander of that formation's cancelled the movement order. He looked at trying to move and thought, no, I cannot move my men, it's impossible. And I've read many accounts that kind of back this up, and that is when Macedonian formation was in that formation, it couldn't move. It's purely defensive only. If they want to move, they have to change formation. So let's get them back to open. Right, what I'm going to do now, I'm going to up the time compression to times 20, and we'll see how these two guys get on. Obviously, this formation here stopped moving. It's obviously much faster speed. I see this, the open formation, or the formation of Macedonia, doesn't actually give it a name because it's their standard formation. Not only is it pulling ahead, but so far it's received no cohesion damage, and yet the battle formation is starting to receive cohesion damage from trying to travel over the ground. And how far away? That's the baseline, 100 meters. That's right, after just over 100 meters travelled. So let's carry on moving. Okay, remember this is at times 20 speed. So you see the open formation still hasn't received any kind of cohesion damage. The battle formation is taking quite a lot of cohesion damage, and what's the distance there? That's about what we're looking at. It's a little under 500 meters. It's taken quite a lot of cohesion damage, and I think this formation change is actually shed some light on some of the arguments that scholars have been having. They've been saying for ages that the Greek phalanx was a difficult formation to manoeuvre, lost cohesion very easily as soon as it moved. But having read a lot of the battles of Alexander, that's simply not the case. Alexander's formations, his phalangites could fight across stream beds. It's just they fought over incredibly bad terrain and did so without losing cohesion. Yet when you read a lot of the later battles where the Macedonians are going up against the Romans, you do hear and read accounts of their formations falling apart. And the reason why I think that is, Alexander's phalangites received a lot of training. When he recruited some new people halfway through his campaigns, I think their training took 15 years. Like, that's a lot of time to train troops to do their manoeuvres. But the results of Alexander's training was that his units could quite easily switch between this 16 deep and 8 deep to take advantage of the terrain. Now, I'm pretty certain, although I don't have much evidence of this, that the later Macedonian formations weren't as well trained and actually went into battle they went into battle 8 deep, but they weren't trained well enough to be able to change formation. So as a result, they did lose cohesion quite often. And in fact, I'm pretty certain that the newer formations not only were probably more dense than Alexander's formations, even more dense than this one. I think they ran at 16 and 32 deep. So the later Saracen base phalangites that fought the Romans was not the same formation that Alexander used. Alexander's was far more flexible and far more highly trained. In fact, I read one account of one of the smaller battles Alexander was involved in. He just got his phalangites to go through all their formation drills in front of the enemy, and his phalangites were so precise and did things so well that the enemy actually fled the battlefield before the battle started. That's what 15 years of training does, which unfortunately the later Macedonian formations just didn't have. So there we go. That pretty much covers everything I wanted to cover for formation changes. I'm sure there are tweaks that I'm going to need to sort out. There are definitely one or two bugs lurking because there was a lot of code that went into this, but I can fix that. But the great thing is, as you can see here, it's provided some actual historical insight that wouldn't necessarily be obvious from reading a book, and actually helps clarify which historians were right and which were wrong, because you can actually prove it and test it out in this system. And of course, Ancient Armies, because its formations are modelling density, this formation, if it were to go into contact, actually has more spears per meter than this formation, so can potentially do more damage. And all this is modelled in Ancient Armies, something other systems don't necessarily do. And of course, Roman formations, different ball game altogether, they tend to be a lot more open, so they very rarely suffer cohesion damage. And because they're physically smaller, they can actually wheel a lot faster. You have to see my earlier video on wheeling to see that. So Ancient Armies, very, very accurate formation modelling, and it's the core of the experience. Now, one thing I'd like to say now is you won't be needing to micromanage all these formation changes unless you really want to during a real battle. Because the game will allow you to set up standard operating procedures, so the units will do things automatically, and a lot of things will happen via preset orders, basically signals. So only very rarely in an actual pitch battle will you be issuing lots of individual orders like this. So that's it. Hope this video sheds some light on the detail of modelling that we're doing. And thank you for watching. Bye.